I'm Darren Morton,
I'm Simon Matthews. This is Lift.
the Lifestyle Medicine podcast where we dive into the science of health and wellbeing.
Hey Darren, nice to see you.
Nice to see you, brother Simon. How's life?
Life is very good. Do you know? I think I was wearing this same shirt last time that we recorded. It's kind of a, it feels we're coming into summer, and it feels like a summery colour to me.
You look very summery. You actually do look very summery.
Yeah. It's a watermelon coloured shirt.
Very nice.
Watermelon's one of my favourite things to chow down on in summer. So I've got a question for you. What does the name Alfred Korzybski mean to you?
Well, Alfred means something to me. The second name, not so much.
Not so much. I thought that might be the case. Many people probably don't know the name Alfred Korzybski, but they probably are familiar with an idea that he kind of brought to life and framed for us, which I'm going to share with you in a moment. And it's an important idea because, and we'll go on to discuss this, because it has implications for how we think about what we see and what we do, particularly in lifestyle medicine, and our interactions with patients and clients and so on. So Alfred Korzybski was a Polish-American philosopher and someone that I think now we would call an independent scholar. And independent scholars kind of don't exist so much anymore. But historically, scholars used to often travel from university to university, and they would be paid a small stipend at each university that they visited. Alfred Korzybski was a bit like that. He was born in 1879, died in 1950. He was an engineer. He was a military intelligence officer during the Second World War. He moved from Poland to the United States, I think maybe at the beginning of the Second World War, wrote a couple of books, and in particular founded look, I'll call it a discipline. There's some question over that, but the discipline is called general semantics. And general semantics is the idea, as Korzybski described it, that our own knowledge as people is limited by two things. First, the structure of our own nervous system, and secondly, the structure of the language that we use to describe it. Now, to describe life. In other words, we never actually, it's impossible for us to directly perceive life. We can only, in a sense, perceive abstractions of it, because life is filtered through the language that we use and our own nervous systems. And that second part of it, the filtering through language, is a construct that has drawn much more attention, particularly in the latter part of the 20th century and right through to now. And that is the idea of constructionism. Constructionism is the idea that the language that we use helps to shape the reality that we experience. And it's very easy to illustrate that. If I say to you right now, Darren, what are the top 3 problems that you're dealing with in your life right now? You don't have to tell me what they are, but I want you to call them to mind. The top 3 problems that you're dealing with in your life right now. You got those in your mind? Yeah. Okay. Now, as you think about those, as you really focus on those problems that you're having to manage, I want you to just give me a rating of your mood right now. 10 out of 10 is buoyant and optimistic. 0 is kind of straight off the top of your head. Don't overthink it.
5.
5. Okay. All right. Now I'm going to ask you a different question. I want you to think about your best 3 internal resources. You know, they might be character strengths, they might be values or beliefs that you have, might be knowledge that you have, anything at all. I want you to think about the 3 things that you consider to be best for you. You got those in your mind?
Yeah.
Okay, now rate your mood again out of 10.
Now I'm a 9. Yeah.
9, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the language that we use dramatically shapes the experience that we have. And this is the idea of constructionism. So Korzybski was very interested in this, but in particular, he uttered a very elegant sentence at some stage, and I think actually printed this in a book as well. He is famous. This sentence was recorded at a lecture he gave, but the sentence is this: the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. And if you think about that for a moment, the implications of that are pretty profound. We know this, for example, from our daily lives. If you use Google Maps or Apple Maps, for example, to help you navigate, as many people do, we know that they're representations of what's out here, but they're not exactly the same. Google Maps and Apple Maps don't, for example, record every tree, every weed in the pavement, or every pebble on the road. It's a broad representation. And here's a question for you: if you were navigating somewhere using Google Maps, and Google Maps said, go straight ahead here for another kilometre or mile or whatever it might be, and you started doing that, and then you came up against some really obvious obstacle or barrier, maybe a hole in the road or a barrier across the road or a fence or something like that, what do you do at that point?
Turn around, change course.
Yeah. You don't persist in using the map because the map tells you that you should be able to go straight ahead. You change your focus and say, this is what the territory is telling me, and I need to pay attention to this. And this is kind of inherent in the idea that Korzybski was presenting to us, that the map is not the territory. Now, I will say this is not the main focus of what we want to talk about, but I will say that Korzybski's work around general semantics has been criticised and questioned. So some people say that, empirically it's a little bit thin, it's a little bit hard to kind of support some of this, and that's partly because some of the core elements of general semantics are unfalsifiable, and we know that that's an important construct in any theory. Some people may say he made some, a few sweeping claims about human beings and so on. So there are some valid criticisms of general semantics, but this sort of core idea, the map is not the territory, is an idea that I first heard about 30 years ago as a very young family therapist and couples therapist, and it's an idea that has stayed with me ever since. And it's tremendously useful, I think, for us in the way that we approach our patients and our clients and the work that we do. You got it. Let me hear your reflection.
Yeah, I'm interested in this whole idea of language in particular, and even the map analogy is a nice one with Google Maps. What these things are, the way the map communicates or attempts to communicate the territory, and our language does the same thing, but it's incomplete. Yeah. And I find this interesting experience. And now I heard this said the other day, and I thought this sums me up to a T. It said that this person said, what I find is that as I get older and I can't remember the word for a particular thing, what I now do is I say, I'm just trying to find the word. I can't remember the English word for this. right? Because they said what this does, it makes it sound like you're multilingual and not an idiot, which the truth be told, you're an idiot, right? So anyway, but I thought to myself, I know I've had experiences with people who are multilingual who will actually struggle to articulate what they want to express because they don't know the word for it in that particular language.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so I find
this. I can attest to. I can attest to that. I have that experience. So sometimes, and I would not. I mean, I happen to speak French, Spanish, and English, but I wouldn't describe myself as multilingual because I don't think my language capacity is developed enough to be able to say that. But I know that I have the experience, for example, now where I'm surrounded by so much Spanish, of reading something in Spanish and understanding exactly what it means. But do you think I can find the English word to say that? So it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Well, and even within our own language, this is quite funny. My brother, who lectures at the university that I'm at as well, we went to a research colloquium just the other day, and it was a sociologist presenting. And look, I'm not a sociologist, and my brother's he's a ecologist. So here we are, sort of coming from the science camp, and this sociologist started spruiking all of these terms that we had no idea. And I remember about three minutes in, I looked at my brother and he looked at me, and I sort of under my breath said, "I don't think we have any business being here." The point was, even the language that we use, and for example, communicating with a child, you have to be, articulated and use the tools that you have available to you, to you that are, accessible to other people. So, I'm intrigued by this whole idea of, semantics, what words we use, how we communicate that, recognizing there's going to be inadequacies with that process.
Absolutely. And sometimes, as you've just illustrated really nicely, sometimes the language that is used in particular situations, when combined with other elements of that situation, for example, perceived differences in power or differences in perceived levels of power, that language can lead us to form particular understandings of ourselves. So it's not inconceivable that in the situation you just talked about, you and your brother are sitting there, as educated as you are, with PhDs, hearing this language and starting to feel a sense of maybe it's me. Maybe
probably was.
Maybe I'm not as sort of clued in as I thought I was. Nothing's changed about you. You're just as educated, just as well read, just as curious and so on as you were 5 minutes before. But the language that's being used in this particular context is leading you to ask those questions. So this is probably the most, I think, this is the most important point in healthcare and lifestyle medicine, the language that we use, because the language that we use is so, so powerful, and it has such a shaping influence on the relationship that we develop with a patient or client, the perception they develop of themselves over time, and therefore we know that if our perceptions change, then our beliefs change, our attitudes change, our actions change, and so on. So there's this large kind of cycle here that goes on. And I don't want to say it starts with language because that would deny the circular causality of it all, but the language is certainly a really powerful influence in all of that that shapes so much of what we do and say.
I agree, and the point is words matter, and I think words are incredibly powerful, and they do have the power to build up or to deflate. And I even think about this in a very simple way. Like, for example, I tend not to use the word exercise nowadays when I talk to community groups.
LIFT is supported by the LIFT Project, an educational adventure where you learn science-based ways to lift your mood and your life. The Lift Project is lifting lives around the globe in healthcare settings, workplaces, schools, universities, and communities. To find out more, visit theliftproject.global.
And maybe I've shared this before, but for most people, when you say the word exercise, if I do an honesty test with them and I say what comes to mind when I use the word exercise, they think of pain and they think of sweat. This is, they're the most. I play this words association game all around the world, and this is what people say. And if number one's pain, well, Aristotle told us we tend to do things to avoid that. So I'm very acutely aware that in my communication, if I say the word exercise to particular cohorts, they're going to go, already I'm tapping out. I don't want to be. I don't want to be part.
Yeah.
So I'll talk about being active. I'll talk about moving. All of those things which seem a whole lot more accessible. But I agree with you. I think words make an incredible difference. And not only that, obviously the tone that we deliver the words
Absolutely.
with and the encouragement that we offer through our words.
The pacing, the pausing.
It's incredible to me how just a little encouragement can go such a long, long way. And I know this to be the truth because I experience it myself. There are times when you're feeling like, like you asked me to think about a couple of the big pressing problems that I'm, wrestling with at the moment. And I've got a couple that are front of mind. And I've had someone who's just speaks a little bit of life into that, or just says something encouraging. And it's incredible the difference that makes. I think it was Mark Twain that said, I can go for a couple of months on a good compliment. And there's a truth to that. That sort of those words.
Absolutely. And the psychologist Albert Bandra, whose famous body of work is around social cognitive theory and self-efficacy, also observed that if someone's a little ambivalent about something, it's much easier to discourage the person from doing it than it is to encourage them to do it. A couple of words will lead the person to say, no, that's it, I'm out. Whereas we often need a lot more to support someone to move in the other direction. So the really interesting thing about this is that we often we always use language really as a descriptive shorthand. And so when we use the word exercise, at one level it seems convenient because we believe that there's a shared or common meaning there. But in fact, the word exercise masks a whole lot of experiences that are really important. What sorts of things do we associate with exercise? Well, some people, as you've said, pain, discomfort, frustration, low levels of self-efficacy. For others, movement, activity, connection, joy, elation, fun, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so therefore what we really want to do is somehow try and convey as clear an idea of the territory as we can, without overly resorting to a dramatically simplified map. There's a really nice Korzybski himself did a really nice illustration of this, and this is probably the most famous. What's the word I'm looking for? Another word in Spanish, but I can't think of it in English. The most famous anecdote about Korzybski's work during a lecture. He wrapped 2 biscuits just in plain white paper and offered them to some of the students in the room. 2 students took them and started eating them. And then he unwrapped them and they were labelled dog biscuits. And a number of people were suddenly appalled and revolted. And his point was, why? When you actually experienced the territory, it was okay.
Yeah.
Now that you're looking at a map of the territory, you're kind of going, oh, this is terrible. So sometimes the word or the label or the representation we treat as the real thing, rather than treating that simply as a shorthand representation, and actually experiencing the the real territory. We do the same thing. We do the same thing in lots of ways. I think a lot of what passes for reviews of anything, a review of a film, a review of a product, now do the same thing. That's the map. But the territory is actually your own direct experience of the product. You can read a bunch of reviews about a film that, give it 1 star or give it 3 out of 10 and say, lousy acting and stupid story and holes in the plot and whatever. But that may not be your experience of that territory. Which one do you attend to? Do you really just say, I loved this. This was fantastic, or do you lean more towards that map?
Well, what that makes me think of too is that those other reviews are their expression of the territory and how they view it.
Exactly right.
And which really speaks to the importance of listening to other people and how they communicate, because they're actually describing for you their perspective on what that territory looks like. I was reminded just the other day, I was chatting with someone and I was thinking about this particular activity that we were going to participate in. I'm quite excited about the idea. And for this person, it was just a naysay. And it was all that could go wrong. And it dawned on me, this person's perspective and their worldview was just so far removed from mine. And I realized that, hey, if I actually want to probably connect in a meaningful way with this person, I probably need to try and, get in their headspace a little bit and understand and try and see the territory as they perceive it, which is obviously, that's a whole new layer of challenge. And I mentioned the skills of probably doing that. But
yeah. So this is really interesting, because what you're now describing here is your own personal experience of recognizing those differences between map and territory, and making a conscious decision to lean more into making sure I do engage with the territory. And this is an important, I would call this an important meta reflection for all of us to engage in everything that we do. One of the best examples from my own life, it was around art in galleries. So I quite like when I travel somewhere, I quite like going to galleries, mostly to get a sense of the art and the culture in that area. And I do this deliberately because art and culture is not my native language. I'm 59 years old. If you ask me to draw a person, at best you'll get a stick figure with no fingers. That's the limit of my artistic ability. So I've always really struggled to engage in that way, and so I push myself to go and experience art. But what I found myself doing many years ago was, going to an exhibition, and you walk into the room that has all these paintings, and then I'd stand there reading the long description of this painting. This was painted in such and such a year when the person was living here, and they were under the influence of this person and that person. And if you look at the colours here, the colours represent this, and the textures that, and blah, 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 blah. I would read all of that, try and understand it. Then I'd have a quick look at the painting or the sculpture and go, oh, wow, okay. And then I'd move to the next and do the same thing. And several years ago, I realised I was doing this, and now I do the complete opposite. And these days, there are often little QR codes at the bottom of those descriptive panels. So now what I do is walk in, I quickly scan the QR code, get that on my phone. Then I just go and stand in front of the work of art, see what it does to me. Sometimes it does something and sometimes it doesn't, but I'll experience that. Then, depending on what happens, I might read a little bit of what I just scanned, or I might wait until after I've left the gallery to read that some more. So these days I really try to experience the territory rather than just experiencing the map. And I think this is a useful exercise for all of us. There's a particular application, I think, in healthcare of this idea, which is very important, and it intersects with another kind of body of knowledge, which you and I have talked about in the past. And that body of knowledge is common factors research and common factors theory. So interestingly, Alfred Korzybski, our general semanticist, died in 1950. That was about the time when common factors theory was beginning to emerge. And it was emerging in response to the question, we've got all these different sort of ways of understanding human behaviour and intervening in human behaviour. Which one is the best? And fairly quickly, researchers established that they were all about as good as each other, and that wasn't even the most important thing. The most important thing is something completely different. In fact, the most important element of predicting. Not predicting, but the most important element of variance in outcomes in behavioural change is the patient's or the client's own resources, their internal resources, their strengths, their values, their beliefs, their attitudes, their knowledge, their resilience, etc., as well as their external resources, people around them, systems or habits that they've built for themselves, processes that they have that work for them, the environment in which they do what they do, the amenity of the community in which they live, external resources as well, and their capacity to interact with those. That's the single biggest factor that influences outcomes. And that's actually territory. That's real stuff. That's it. That's the internal territory of the person and the external territory of the person. The next most important factor is what's called the therapeutic alliance or the coaching alliance, the relationship between the practitioner and the patient or client. And that's territory as well, because that's what we actually cultivate between us. And that's one of the most important things that any practitioner can do. The model that you use for intervention, whether that's the trans-theoretical model of change or a tool like motivational interviewing or cognitive behavioural therapy or solution-focused brief coaching or whatever it might be. And there's roughly 100, or we can go back to some older models of change too, like the theory of reasoned action, the theory of planned behaviour, which you're familiar with. All of those things are simply maps. They're ways of trying to make sense of what we actually experience in real life, and we try to represent it in a way that gives us a sense of control over it. But it's nothing more than a map.
Go on. To what extent that therapeutic alliance that you refer to what extent is that predicated on the therapist's ability to actually, I suppose, get in or view the map of the person that they're connecting with?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I would say there's a high level of correlation there, or a very high significance there, because if you think about in a clinical encounter or a therapeutic encounter, what really, when you're in the position of being the client or the patient, what's something that really, really matters to you? And I would say for pretty much all of us, that thing is feeling like we've been heard and understood. And and understood is a really critical part of this.
Yes.
Feeling like we've been heard and understood. And if you have that experience, then that does something in that relationship of helping you to feel like this person is trustworthy, this person is reliable, I value what this person has to say to me or share with me, and all of those things together then amplify that kind of alliance.
Yeah, it's that rapport piece, isn't it? And I think I remember reading years ago about rapport, and they talk about comedians, for example, like take Seinfeld, right? He has this highly successful show about nothing, but it's not
Yeah.
really about nothing, because what it is, it's these little nuances, these little strange behaviours that he makes a big deal out of, and we go, oh, you know what, I do that. Right. And it
Absolutely.
seems really
Yeah.
odd to be talking about it, but I'm like that. And then all of a
Yeah.
sudden we feel like we've got rapport with that individual.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's because it's almost like we have this sense that their map's the same as our map. You know, how they're perceiving the world is the same as the way that we perceive and interact with the world. And that creates that sense of rapport, and
Yeah.
you know, and I suppose we're more willing to listen to a person like that or engage with a person like that because they're like us, or we sense that they're like us.
Yeah. And this is I think this is one of the characteristics, for example, of stand-up comedians in particular, that they use material often from their daily experience that many other people are likely to have experienced as well, and they build around that and riff on that, and that's why we feel that sense of kind of connection and being understood, because I've done this, I've been here, I know this.
Yes, and particularly if it's a bit of an oddity, because then you think, because you know, we sort of, like, for example, you know, we're walking along and I just can't step on that line, and all of a sudden I've got this untimely gait because I'm going and I'm saying to my brain, step on that line, and then you think, oh, I can't do it because if I do that, something bad might happen. You know, like when we sort of have these examples and we think, oh, I thought I was the only person that did that, and then all of a sudden that makes us feel, you know, like a lot more connected. So, you know,
you said something a moment ago that is really worth hovering on for a moment, and that is that sometimes we can develop the sense that we have a shared map, and sometimes that can contribute to rapport. And an individual may develop that sense, but importantly in this context, there's no requirement for the clinician and the patient or client to have shared maps. It's not necessary. The clinician can and should maintain their own map because it's consistent with their own understandings and views and values and beliefs and so on. The only thing that's necessary here is to recognise that you're using a map. You recognise that this isn't real territory that applies to everyone. You put your map aside in order to really focus on and take time to understand the map that the other person is using for their life. And when we do that, we really dramatically, I think, amplify the therapeutic alliance. But very often, you know, in my role as a supervisor and mentor of coaches and psychologists and counsellors, many times over the last 30 years, I've had people say to me, I've been working with a particular client in a particular way, and you know, we haven't been getting anywhere using motivational interviewing, so I'm going to try solution focused brief therapy, for example. And what common factors theory tells us is that only influences a really tiny part of the outcomes. All you're doing is changing maps. But they're not the most important things. The most important things are pay attention to the territory that your client is actually walking in. And one of the ways that we can also illustrate this is through aviation. And you know, you've had some experience here as well. So I'm sure you're familiar with aviation charts. You know, navigation charts used for aviation. Very detailed, but they have information that's specific to the task of aviation. So, for example, they don't show you where traffic lights are on the road. They don't show you where houses are or buildings are, unless they're really huge, you know, physically huge and significant. But they do show you lots of other things, you know, important things you need to know, like the height of particular ground or a hill, and so on. You've probably also noticed, though, in aviation that you can navigate to some extent, using a roadmap. For example, if it's a clear day, you can follow the M1 motorway. You don't need an aviation chart to do that, but you can still find your way. So to some extent, we can swap maps, but the territory hasn't changed.
Yes.
The territory is identical, whether you're using an aviation chart or a street map, or simply the internalised map that you keep in your mind. The territory is unchanged, and the map is not the most important thing. The most important thing is fly your aeroplane or control your hang glider. That's the really important task. Do the thing that needs to be done and use the map only to the extent that you need to be able to navigate through that.
Yeah. It's a great discussion, and I really like that, and I'll remember that, the map, not the territory. And I do, once again, I come back to, I'm thinking of, as you've been talking about, Stephen Covey talking about the importance of seeking to understand and then to be understood. And I think that once again resonates a little with me in trying to understand what other people's maps, what their interpretation of the territory might be in order to connect with them. So... Yeah, absolutely. And the language that we use shows the maps that we use as well. Yes,
so
exactly right.
Exactly. if you describe a client or a patient as unmotivated or non-compliant, that doesn't actually describe the patient. That simply tells us about the map that you're using. And you have a map, therefore, that in which you see these as features of an individual, whereas I might have a completely different map from that. So being able to recognise that we all use internalised maps and that they're nothing more than that, they're simply maps, is, I think, one of the most important things that we can do.
Absolutely. And may your map be a nice, valid, helpful depiction of the true territory.
Absolutely. And, swap it out from time to time too.
Lift is presented by Simon Matthews and Darren Morton. It's sponsored by the Lift Project and supported by Avondale University. Music provided by Pixabay. If you have a question or a topic you would like to hear more about, send us an email to podcast@theliftproject.global. The Lift Project. Lift your mood, lift your life.